Subscribe to USX Stories for more incredible tales of hidden heroes and untold courage. The air in Hangar 17 tasted like diesel and imminent violence. 52 Navy SEALs, the deadliest warriors America could forge, stood frozen, their jaws slack with disbelief. Their commander, a 230-pound bull, a man named Jester Davies, lay sprawled on a concrete floor like a sack of dropped potatoes. Standing over him was a woman who looked like someone's grandmother, small, unassuming, wearing an oversized flight suit with zero insignia. She hadn't punched him. She hadn't kicked him. She'd simply moved, and physics had done the rest. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sudden, terrifying moan of the sky tearing itself apart outside. Then the storm hit, 100-knot winds that turned the massive hangar into a death trap. As chaos erupted and million-dollar equipment began sliding toward concrete pillars, the woman's quiet voice cut to the pandemonium like a surgical blade. "You have 90 seconds before we all die." That's when Fleet Master Chief Russo arrived, took one look at her, and snapped off a salute reserved for 4-star generals. The SEALs finally understood. They just watched their commander try to bully a living legend. Hangar 17 existed on the edge of the known world, a cathedral built for the gods of war. The air inside was thick enough to chew, a breathing cocktail of diesel exhaust, hydraulic fluid, and the sharp ozone smell of overworked electronics. Gigantic sodium vapor lamps hummed their constant B-flat note from 60 feet above, casting the concrete floor in perpetual sickly orange twilight. The hangar could have swallowed a city block. Its cavernous space turned shouts into whispers and made even the most confident voices sound small and uncertain. Along the far wall squatted AC-17 Globemaster III, a massive gray beast with its cargo ramp lowered like a hungry tongue, ready to swallow the men and materials destined for the violence of the coming night. 52 operators from Naval Special Warfare Group, one moved through this space with the disciplined efficiency of apex predators. These were not ordinary men. They were instruments of national will, each one a nexus of muscle, sinew, and cold understanding of violence. They checked their gear with economical precision, the soft click of magazines being seated, the whisper of nylon straps being adjusted, the metallic snap of weapons being functions checked. The energy in the hangar crackled with contained violence. It was a feeling of a coiled spring of potential energy waiting to be released. These warriors knew they were the finest their nation could produce, and they wore that knowledge like invisible armor. And in the middle of this masculine, militarized universe stood an anomaly. She was positioned near the port side wing of the Globemaster, a small island of absolute stillness, in a sea of controlled motion. Her olive drab flight suit hung loosely on her small frame, devoid of rank insignia or unit patches. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that revealed an angular face entirely absorbed in the ruggedized tablet she held. To the casual observer, she was nobody, a civilian analyst, perhaps a meteorological specialist, easily overlooked and more easily dismissed. Her attention was so completely focused on the cascading data streams on her screen that the deadly warriors around her might as well have been ghosts. She wasn't ignoring them. She was simply operating on a different plane of existence, one defined by barometric pressure gradients, thermodynamics, and the esoteric mathematics of atmospheric chaos theory. Act 2, the Predator's approach. Commander Jester Davies did not do casual observation. He saw everything, or so he believed, with the unshakable certainty of a man who had never been proven wrong in a way that mattered. He stood near the staging pallets, a bull of a man whose physical presence was itself a weapon. His jaw looked carved from naval tradition, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing, or so he thought. Authority radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He was a Mustang, an officer risen from the enlisted ranks, and he wore this fact like a badge of superiority. It gave him, in his own mind, unique insight into the soul of the warrior. When his eyes fell upon the woman with the tablet, they narrowed with immediate disapproval. He watched her for 2 full minutes, his irritation growing with each passing second. Her stillness was unnatural. Everyone else in the hangar was focused on the mission, on the gear, on the palpable energy of impending action. She was focused on a screen, her face a mask of detached concentration. To Commander Davies, This wasn't just odd. It was disrespectful. It was a civilian failing to appreciate the gravity of the temple she'd been allowed to enter. He began his approach, his boots deliberately scuffing on the gritty concrete. The operators in his path parted like the Red Sea, their attention shifting subtly to follow their commander. They knew that look. Jester was on the hunt, and something entertaining was about to happen. Don't forget to subscribe to USX Stories to discover more tales of hidden heroes who shaped military history from the shadows. Davies came to a stop directly in front of the woman, positioning his large frame to block the overhead light and cast her in a considerable shadow. She did not look up. Her fingers continued their precise dance across the screen, manipulating weather charts and atmospheric models that looked like hieroglyphics to the uninitiated. This, more than anything, ignited the flame of his anger. He was the center of this universe, the gravitational point around which all these men orbited. To be so utterly ignored by this data clerk was intolerable. You got something more important than a Tier 1 operational brief going on there, ma'am? His voice was a low growl, laced with condescension perfected over years of command. It was a voice of unquestionable authority, addressing someone who possessed none. For a moment, there was no response, only the ever-present hum of the hangar lights. Then, without looking up, she gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It wasn't defiance. It was pure, unadulterated focus, the kind of dismissal one gives a buzzing fly. A ripple of unease mixed with amusement spread through the nearby SEALs. This wasn't the expected reaction. The expected reaction was a flustered apology, a stammered explanation, hasty deference to rank and presence. Davies' face tightened. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice dropping another octave, the feigned politeness evaporating. He took another half-step forward, deliberately invading her personal space. The scent of his sweat, stale coffee, and raw aggression washed over her. This time, she responded. Her fingers stopped moving. Slowly, as if surfacing from a great depth, she lifted her head. Her eyes, a startlingly clear and intelligent gray, met his. There was no fear in them, no anger, no emotion at all. It was a calm, analytical gaze of a scientist observing an interesting but entirely predictable chemical reaction. "Commander," she said, her voice quiet but carrying strange resonance in the vast space. "You are mistaken. This data is not more important than your brief. It is a foundation upon which your brief is built. It is the only reason your brief has any relevance at all." The sheer, unadorned confidence of her statement stunned the onlookers into silence. Davies blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He'd expected a mouse and found something else entirely, but his ego, massive and well-armored, quickly righted itself. He interpreted her clinical tone as arrogance, her statement as a challenge. He laughed. A short, sharp bark utterly devoid of humor. "Is that so? You the new weather girl? Let me give you a little lesson. Out here, we don't get canceled on account of a little rain. My men will go through hell and high water, and your little charts don't mean a damn thing when we're kicking indoors. Now, put the toy away and clear my hangar. The adults are working." The insult was plain, public, designed to humiliate. It was a power play, a verbal shove meant to put her firmly in her place. The SEALs watched with impassive faces, but approval ran through them like an electric current. This was their world. The commander was simply reasserting its natural order. The woman's expression did not change. The unnerving calm remained. "Commander," she said again, voice still level, devoid of heat. "You are operating under a flawed assumption. You believe this is your hangar. You believe this is your operational space. You are on both counts incorrect." The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like a minnow lecturing a great white shark on the nature of the ocean. Davies' face, which had been tight with irritation, now flushed a deep, dangerous red. His shoulders squared. His hands curled into loose fists at his sides. He was a man accustomed to violence, and his body began preparing for it. "You have 5 seconds to get out of my sight," he snarled, voice a hiss of compressed rage, "before I have you physically removed." She did not move, did not flinch, did not turn. Instead, she made a final, precise gesture on her tablet, locking the screen. Then she looked past him, her gaze sweeping over the assembled operators, over the massive aircraft, over the entire cathedral of war. For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been regret crossed her features. "There is no time for that, Commander," she said, voice barely a whisper yet cutting through the hangar's hum. "You have wasted too much of it already." The confrontation had reached its apex. His authority had been publicly questioned. His threat had been ignored. In his world, there was only one possible response. He took the final step, his body tensing, his right hand beginning to lift. Not to strike, but to grab, to physically dominate, to enforce his will upon this infuriatingly calm woman. He was going to move her. He was going to prove that in this world, his world, physical power was the ultimate truth. His hand shot out, aiming for her shoulder, but it never landed. Act 3, the physics of humility. In the instant his body committed to the action, she moved. It wasn't a martial arts block. It wasn't a fighter's stance. It was pure economic physics. She shifted her weight slightly, pivoting on the ball of her left foot. Her hand came up, not to strike his, but to meet his wrist with her open palm. Simultaneously, her other hand gently touched his elbow. The movement was so fluid, so precise, it was almost beautiful. She didn't resist his momentum. She redirected it. She used his own forward aggression, his own mass and velocity against him. Commander Rick Davies, a 230-pound man who could bench press twice his weight, suddenly found the world tilting on its axis. His forward lunge became an uncontrolled spiral. His feet, which had been so firmly planted, tangled beneath him. He wasn't thrown. He wasn't struck. He was simply undone. He crashed to the ground in a heap of surprised limbs and bruised pride, the sound of his body hitting the floor echoing with sickening finality in the now dead silent hangar. She stood over him, not with triumph, not with anger, but with the same detached, analytical calm she displayed all along. She looked down at the sprawled commander the way a physicist might look at a failed experiment. And in that exact moment, as 52 operators stared in stunned disbelief, the world outside the hangar doors ended. Act 4, the storm. It began not with sound, but with feeling. A sudden, violent drop in atmospheric pressure that made every man's ears pop simultaneously. The great corrugated steel hangar doors, each weighing several tons, groaned in their tracks like dying beasts. The B-flat hum of the sodium vapor lamps was suddenly drowned by a new sound, a low, terrifying moan that grew in pitch and volume with breathtaking speed. It was the sound of the sky itself being torn apart. Then the wind hit. It didn't rise. It detonated. A solid wall of air moving at over 100 knots struck the hangar. The massive structure shuddered on its foundations. Dust and debris that had lain dormant for decades were blasted from the rafters, creating a swirling brown fog in the orange light. Unsecured tool chests skittered across the floor like toys. Pallets of ammunition and supplies, each weighing thousands of pounds, began to slide, their immense inertia overcome by the sheer, relentless force of the gale. Panic, foreign and unwelcome, flickered through the hangar. The SEALs, trained for chaos and combat, were momentarily stunned by the sheer violence of this environmental assault. Their training was for enemies with guns, not for an atmosphere that had suddenly become a weapon. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the space into absolute darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before emergency generators kicked in with a guttural roar, bathing the scene in stark, sterile white LED light. In the renewed illumination, chaos reigned. Men were shouting, their voices swallowed by the shriek of the wind. Junior officers yelled contradictory orders, their authority dissolving in the face of a crisis their manuals had never covered. Commander Davies scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of confusion, rage, and dawning horror. His personal humiliation was forgotten, eclipsed by a far greater threat. His eyes darted to the C-17. The massive aircraft, fully fueled and laden with sensitive electronics and ordnance, was straining against its mooring chains. The wind was hitting it broadside, trying to lift its massive wing as if it were paper. The mooring chains, thick as a man's wrist, vibrated with high-frequency thrumming, groaning under loads they were never designed to bear. If one snapped, the aircraft would pivot. Its wing would strike the hangar wall. The resulting rupture and spark would turn Hangar 17 and everyone in it into a crater of incandescent fuel and metal. Get those doors closed. Now! Davies bellowed, finding his command voice. But it was useless. The wind pressure on the hangar doors was astronomical. The hydraulic systems designed to move them were powerless. "Tie down that gear," another officer screamed, pointing to a prototype stealth insertion vehicle worth over $90 million sliding inexorably toward a concrete support pillar. The failure of conventional authority was total and immediate. The finely tuned machine of naval special warfare was grinding to a halt, its gears jammed by a force it couldn't understand and couldn't fight. Act 5. The Eye of the Hurricane. In the heart of this rising storm of chaos and fear, the woman remained the eye of the hurricane. The moment the pressure had dropped, the instant the wind hit, her posture had changed. The detached scientist was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Her body, which had seemed small and unassuming, now radiated absolute, unshakable purpose. The analytical calm in her eyes had been forged into something harder, sharper, the crystalline focus of command. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She moved, flowing through the chaos like water, her steps economical and certain. She reached the main command console near the hangar's administrative office, her fingers flying across the keypad with sure certainty. A schematic of the hangar's structural and utility systems flashed onto the main screen, data she had clearly studied and memorized. Then she spoke. Her voice, though not raised, cut through the din of wind and shouting with impossible clarity. It was not the voice of the quiet analyst from before. This voice was a weapon, imbued with pure, unadulterated authority that silenced everyone who heard it. "All hands, cease current actions and listen to my voice." The words were not a request. They were a statement of fact. The shouting died, replaced by the howl of the storm. Heads turned, eyes wide with confusion and dawning awe, fixed on the small woman in the plain flight suit. "You have 90 seconds before the primary portside mooring chain on the aircraft fails due to harmonic resonance. When it does, the aircraft will pivot and impact the superstructure. You will all die." The clinical, brutal finality of her words hung in the air, colder and sharper than the wind. She had not offered a theory. She had delivered a verdict. Commander Davies stared at her, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he managed to yell, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the bluster of a man whose world had been turned upside down. She ignored him completely. "I require 3 fire teams. Team 1, you will acquire 4 2-inch tungsten cargo straps from the forward logistics pallet. Team 2, you will man the auxiliary hydraulic winch on the port wall. Acknowledge." A grizzled master chief, a man who had forgotten more about combat than most would ever learn, found himself responding before he knew why. "Acknowledged," he barked, pointing at 2 teams. "You heard her. Go." The men, grateful for clear orders in chaos, moved with renewed purpose. "Team 3, the woman continued, eyes scanning the structural schematic. "You will proceed to the C-17's forward landing gear. You will find a manual pressure release valve behind the axle assembly. It is painted yellow. You will bleed the hydraulic pressure from the oleo strut. Do not wait for my command. Begin bleeding it now. The rate must be constant. Too fast, and you will destabilize the airframe." This was not the language these men were used to. It was not the language of assault and breach. It was the arcane language of engineering, of physics, of deep, intimate knowledge of systems. It was a language of expertise, and it silenced the amateurs completely. As teams scrambled to execute her orders, she turned her attention to the rest of the operators. "All other personnel, form human chains. Link arms. You will secure all loose pallets, starting with the ordnance and moving to the Class 5 supplies. You are now ballast. Your job is to add mass to the system. Move." The effect was electric. 500 men, a leaderless mob moments before, were now a single coordinated organism. They moved with the discipline and speed for which they were famous, but now channeled by her will. Human chains formed, men leaning into the wind, their combined weight stopping the slide of multi-ton pallets. The hangar, what had been on the verge of catastrophic failure, was now a scene of intense, focused, brutally effective action. She directed the winch team with complex hand signals, guiding them as they attached tungsten straps to hard points on the hangar floor, and then to the C-17's main gear assembly. She wasn't just securing the plane. She was creating a counter-tension system, a web of support designed to dampen the vibrations threatening to tear the main mooring chain apart. She was speaking to the wind in its own language of force and counterforce. Commander Davies could only watch, frozen in horrified awe. This wasn't leadership as he knew it. He led men. She was leading the very physics of the environment. She saw things he couldn't see. Stress points, harmonic frequencies, load vectors. She was playing three-dimensional chess against a hurricane, and she was winning. Every order was precise. Every action had clear, calculated purpose. No wasted effort. No hesitation. The dawning comprehension of his mistake was a cold, sick feeling in his stomach. He hadn't just insulted a civilian. He had assaulted a master. He had been a child playing with matches in the presence of a god of fire. Act 6, the revelation. Just as the winch team pulled the final tungsten strap taut, a new sound entered the symphony of chaos. The piercing siren of an inbound convoy. The massive storm doors on the far side of the hangar began to retract with a low, powerful hum. They were on a separate hardened grid, unaffected by the localized power failure. A wedge of armored vehicles led by a heavily modified Humvee with a forest of antennas sliced through the driving rain and into the relative calm of the hangar. The Humvee screeched to a halt. The passenger door flew open, and a man emerged, moving with urgent, deliberate stride. He was older, his face a road map of a life spent in service, his uniform crisp and adorned with 3 silver stars. Fleet Master Chief Russo, the Command Master Chief for the entire theater of operations. He was a living icon, a man whose quiet authority eclipsed that of most admirals. Russo's sharp eyes took an entire scene in a single sweeping glance. The straining aircraft, the human chains of seals holding back pallets, the newly secured winch lines vibrating with tension, and the small woman in the plain flight suit standing at the command console, her work seemingly done. His face, normally a stern mask of discipline, softened with profound relief and something else, reverence. He ignored Commander Davies. He ignored the other officers. He walked directly toward the woman, his boots echoing on the concrete. The operators, seeing who had arrived, stopped what they were doing. A hush fell over the hangar, the howl of the wind outside only deepening the profound silence within. Fleet Master Chief Russo came to a halt 3 feet in front of her. He didn't speak. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, back ramrod straight. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the very air. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a junior officer. It was a deep, formal gesture of respect reserved for a flag officer, for a visiting dignitary, for someone whose station demanded the highest possible honor. Dr. Thorne, Russo's voice boomed, filled with respect bordering on awe. You are clear to command. We logged your override of the station's environmental controls. All base assets are at your disposal. The name descended into the hangar like a bomb. Thorne, Dr. Aris Thorne. To most of the men, the name meant nothing. But to senior leadership, to intelligence officers, to men who'd been in special operations for more than a decade, the name was legend, ghost story, myth. It was whispered in the same breath as Skunk Works or the Manhattan Project. It was the name of the person they called Ariadne. Dr. Aris Thorne was not a meteorologist. She was a director of the Asymmetric Warfare Group's Environmental Dominance Division. She held doctorates in atmospheric physics and chaos mathematics. She was civilian, yes, but she held a special congressionally mandated GS 18 pay grade, a position created specifically for her that granted operational authority equivalent to a 4-star general in matters relating to her field. She didn't predict the weather. She weaponized it. She designed stealth infiltration routes that used thermal ducts to mask helicopter heat signatures. She created algorithms that allowed submarines to navigate uncharted undersea canyons, using only gravitational anomalies. She was the architect of the very battlefield upon which these men fought. The storm outside wasn't random. It was a hyperlocalized microburst, a rare and violent phenomenon that standard military and civilian weather models were incapable of predicting. Her proprietary model, the one running on her tablet, had predicted it to the second. She had been in the process of issuing a base-wide alert when Commander Davies had decided to teach the weather girl a lesson. The realization crashed over the assembled SEALs like a physical wave. They were looking at a legend. The quiet, unassuming woman in the baggy flight suit was one of the most powerful and important figures in the entire special operations community. They were the tip of the spear. But she was the woman who forged the spear, who knew the precise angle at which it must be thrown, and who understood the winds that would carry it to its target. Fleet Master Chief Russo held his salute, arm rigid, eyes locked on hers. It was public, undeniable validation of her status. A formal declaration to every man in that hangar that the chain of command had just been redrawn. "Thank you, Master Chief," Dr. Thorne said, her voice returning to its former quietness. "The immediate crisis is contained. Please see to the secondary and tertiary mooring points. The shear forces will peak in approximately 12 minutes. "Yes, ma'am," Russo said, dropping his salute with the same sharp precision. He turned and began barking orders, his authority and her delegated command seamlessly merging to restore perfect order. Only then did Dr. Thorne turn her attention back to Commander Davies. Act 7, the lesson. He stood frozen, face pale, blood drained. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own execution. The public nature of his humiliation was absolute. It hadn't happened in a private office, but in front of his men, in front of a living legend like Russo, and at the feet of the very person he'd tried to dominate. She walked toward him, steps measured and silent, the operators nearby, staring at her with a mixture of fear and awe, respectfully cleared a path. She stopped in front of him, her calm gray eyes meeting his. The fury and arrogance were gone from his gaze, replaced by a deep, bottomless well of shame. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't mock him. She didn't gloat. Her tone was that of a professor conducting a post-mission debrief. Clinical, precise, devastatingly educational. "Commander," she began, "your first failure was one of intelligence. You made an assessment based on incomplete and biased data. You saw a woman in a flight suit and registered non-combatant. You saw a civilian and registered irrelevant. You failed to gather information before committing to a course of action. This is the kind of failure that gets your men killed." He flinched as if struck. Her words were more painful than any physical blow. She was deconstructing his failure not as a personal insult to her, but as professional tactical incompetence. She was using the language of his world to dismantle his identity within it. "Your second failure," she continued, voice unwavering, "was one of logistics. You perceive my work as an obstacle to your own. You fail to understand that in modern warfare, logistics and intelligence are not support actions. They are the main effort. The kinetic action your men were preparing for is merely the final and often simplest part of a much larger operational sequence. You tried to sweep the board clean before you even understood the rules of the game." She took a small step closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Your third and most critical failure was one of command. You substituted ego for authority. You used your rank not to lead but to bully. You created a public confrontation to reinforce your own dominance. And in doing so, you distracted yourself and your men at the most critical possible moment. You wasted 112 seconds. According to my models, had you wasted 30 more, the probability of catastrophic airframe failure would have reached 97%. You almost killed every one of your men, not through enemy action, but through sheer, unadulterated arrogance. Each sentence was a perfectly placed shot, striking not at his body, but at the very foundations of his professional identity. He had built his entire career on his gut, his experience, his command presence, and she had just demonstrated with cold, irrefutable logic that all of it was a liability. He finally found his voice, a dry, cracking whisper. I'll report to the Admiral. I'll tend to my resignation." Dr. Thorne shook her head, a flicker of something almost like pity in her eyes. "No, that is the easy way out. That is the coward solution. A resignation allows you to escape the consequences of your ignorance. It does not correct it. You will not be resigning. Commander. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Effective immediately, you are reassigned. Your command is temporarily transferred to your executive officer. Your new duty station is as my executive assistant. You will carry my bags. You will manage my schedule. You will sit in every brief, and you will learn. You will learn about atmospheric mechanics, about logistical chains, about intelligence fusion. You will learn that the modern battlefield is not won by muscle, but by mind. You will learn that true strength is not the power to dominate others, but the discipline to control yourself. You will remain in this position until I am satisfied that you have unlearned the arrogance that almost cost these men their lives. Your re-education, Commander, begins now. Is that understood? He could only nod, throat too tight to speak. It was a punishment far more profound than any court-martial. She wasn't destroying his career. She was forcibly rebuilding it from the ground up. She was subverting the very concept of punishment, turning it into mandatory and deeply humiliating education. He would be a living object lesson for every man in his former command. Epilogue, the legacy. The story of what happened in Hangar 17, that day passed into the lore of the special operations community. Like all such stories, it grew with each telling. The storm became a small typhoon. The number of SEALs grew to 1,000. In some versions, she threw the commander across the entire hangar. But the core truth of the story, the essential lesson, remained pure and unchanged. It became a teaching tool, a modern military fable told to new operators at Coronado and to arrogant young officers at Quantico. It was a story about the difference between style and substance, between authority and power, between noise and competence. Commander Rick Jester Davies disappeared from the operational world for 2 full years. When he returned, he was a different man. The swagger was gone, replaced by quiet, thoughtful intensity. The booming voice had softened, the arrogance in his eyes replaced by deep, abiding wisdom. He never commanded a SEAL team in the field again. Instead, he took a post as lead instructor at the Naval Academy, where he became one of the most respected and effective teachers they'd ever had. His favorite lecture, the one he gave to every incoming class of future officers, was titled The Flawed Assumption. He would stand before them, a man who had been publicly broken and rebuilt, and he would tell the story of Hangar 17. He used his own monumental failure as his primary teaching aid. He taught them that the most dangerous enemy they would ever face was not on the battlefield, but in the mirror. He taught them to question their own assumptions, to respect expertise in all its forms, and understand that the quietest person in the room was often the most important. He had been humbled, but in that humbling, he had found a new and more profound purpose. He became a better man and a far greater leader by learning how to follow. And Dr. Aris Thorne remained a ghost, a legend. Her name would surface from time to time in classified after-action reports or in hushed conversations of generals at the Pentagon. She continued her work in the quiet, unseen corners of the national security apparatus, bending the very laws of nature to the will of her nation. She sought no credit, no medals, no public recognition. For her, the work was everything. Her actions were her argument. Her results were her reward. She remained a quiet professional, a hidden master operating on a plane far above the petty squabbles of ego and rank. The moral of the story, the ultimate lesson of Hangar 17, is not about the humbling of a single arrogant man. It is a broader, more universal truth. True strength is rarely loud. True competence does not need to announce itself. Authority that has to be shouted is no authority at all. In any organization, in any walk of life, there are the peacocks and producers. There are those who make noise and those who make a difference. The world is full of commanders who believe the hangar belongs to them, who mistake their own reflection for the whole picture. But the work of the world, the real, difficult, and essential work, is so often done by the quiet ones, the focused ones, the Dr. Thornes who are too busy managing the storm to be bothered by the bluster of those who are about to be consumed by it. Do not judge by the uniform or the lack thereof. Do not judge by the volume of the voice. Judge by the content of the action. For in the final analysis, when the winds rise and the structures of our certainty begin to fail, It is not the loudest voice that will save us. It is the calmest mind and the most capable hands. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never confuse humility for inability. And never, ever assume that the person who appears to need your permission is not the one actually granting it. If the story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable, please subscribe to USX Stories. We bring you the untold tales of hidden heroes, the stories of quiet professionals who change history from the shadows, and the lessons that can transform how you see leadership, courage, and true strength. Hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And join our community of those who understand that the most powerful people in any room are often the ones you underestimate. Thank you for reading, and remember, respect is earned not by the volume of your voice, but by the value of your actions.